Hey everyone, how's it going? I am so excited to meet you all. This is going to be really fun. So we are doing a, I'm going to start with just a little basic Photoshop demo. I think I have a few students coming in for some specific one-on-one help. So I will definitely get to you all after I just do this little short kind of demo for my very beginning Photoshop students. But it's so nice to meet you all, and I'm so glad that everyone is here. Let me actually turn on the recording. Oh no, I did turn on the recording. Okay, good. Yay, so I don't think there needs to be anything too complex this week for my beginning color theory and design students, because all you really have for like Photoshop homework is you're doing a little discussion board where you write your name on a document, right? And then what we're doing is you're coming up with your fictitious business name. So that's no Photoshop involved at all. You're just going to be writing a nice little journal entry about your process and make sure to reflect it back to the reading that you did. And then, let me pull up the classroom really quick to make sure I get, then you're going to review our final project. But you're actually not going to get started with it yet. And actually, I'll just start there with the final project, since I do get a lot of students asking questions about that. By the way, this is, you see the little, that's my dog Simone. That's how she looks all the time. She's always sleeping. So your final project is really like open-ended, and I get a lot of students who are like, I'm not sure what to do for the final project, and will you allow XYZ? And I'm like, I will allow pretty much anything for your final project, like, because this is such a beginning level design class. One, this class is designed for people who have never used Photoshop or done any like graphic design work before. So if you're worried at all about, oh no, I don't know enough to be successful in this class, like, put those worries out of your head, okay? Because this class is gonna be super easy. And I hope that those of you who do have some previous Photoshop experience aren't completely bored with it, because it is very basic. But basically, for your final project, you're making a very kind of simple document that's going to be a collage type document. And it's going to be based around your idea for a business. And in coming weeks, we're going to be doing a creative brief, which is like you are telling your potential client, this is the type of project that I'm going to be making for you, and this is our goal with the project. And so I've had, you know what, this is actually a good time to kind of pull up my favorite website, Pinterest. Give me a smiley face. Has anyone gone to Pinterest before? Pinterest is a really, awesome website. It's a kind of a social media website where people share images that are inspiring. And so I'm on Pinterest all the time. And what I'd like to encourage you guys to do is go on Pinterest, and now I'm going to share my screen now that I pulled it up. Go on Pinterest and just do a little search for graphic design and see some of the many amazing graphic design pieces that are out there to inspire you. And what I like to do is I have a board called Art Concepts, which is just anytime I see an image that's kind of cool, I just save it to my Art Concepts folder. I have another board for graphic design. And so anytime I see something that's kind of graphic designy, I kind of save it on there. I also I just have a bunch of boards for like random stuff, like fashion stuff and you know, I have too many boards, honestly, is what I'm saying. But you know, get in the habit of making some Pinterest boards, because that's the best place to go to kind of get started generating ideas. Every time I have to do a project for a client, what I'll do for, you know, because it's impossible to just look at a blank document in Photoshop and be like, I know what I'm gonna do. Usually you look at a blank document and your mind just goes blank. You're like, I have no idea what I'm going to do for this project. And so what you have to do is feed your creativity, right? So you go on Pinterest and you make a board for your project. So you can make a board for your graphic design and color theory final project. And we know for our final project, it has to be a collage of some sort. So that means you are going to be compositing multiple image elements together. So, you know, you can do a search for a graphic design collage or Photoshop collage, and you're gonna pretty soon find some images that are gonna be inspiring to you. Something that's been happening trend-wise in the graphic design industry is, and you've seen so many of these, because I have these types of things for my advanced Photoshop class, but the idea of taking photo work and then incorporating illustration elements into it, like either hand-drawn illustration elements or like vector-looking illustration elements. I also like this new trend where it's like black and white photos that look kind of old-fashioned-y, interspersed with color imagery. There's also kind of a trend towards like color overlays on things. So, you know, just going through and doing a search for graphic design collage or Photoshop collage might give you some good inspiration for your final project, okay? And so make yourself some Pinterest boards. Now let's get back to the super easy peasy discussion that's due this week, which is you're gonna be making a PDF file, and off of the top of my head, I forget what size PDF it's supposed to be. I have a feeling it's 8 by 10, 8 inches by 10 inches. And then you're typing your name and you're saving it as a PDF. So I think most of you have figured out how to do this already. And I'm gonna share my whole desktop now. But it'll be a good place for us to kind of start, and then I'll be able to answer any questions that come up. And let's see. So one person missed the size restrictions. I'm trying to find where the size is listed. Is it in the discussion rubric? Nope. It would be handy if the size was just listed somewhere really easy. I have a feeling it's somewhere. I feel like I've seen it, but I'm just going to pretend for now that it is, that it's 800 by, not 800, 8 inches by 10 inches. So the way we start a new project in Photoshop is either by going to Create New. Yeah, honestly, 5 by 7 is fine, Mercedes. And Melissa also missed the size restriction. So if you made a document that has your name on it and it's saved as a PDF, as long as it's not crazy big, like 8 inches by 10 inches, 3000 DPI or something silly like that, it's fine, okay? And so when we first open up Photoshop to make a new document, you can either hit the Create New button here, or you can go to File, New. So I'm gonna hit Create New. And just because at some point the idea 8 by 10 got into my head, I'm gonna put that there. And usually for documents meant for the screen, we're gonna do 72. I think for our final project, it specifies 300, but if you have trouble uploading it to the gradebook, I will be totally okay with 72 if you want to shrink it down to that size. Alrighty, now let's get a little bit fancy and put, okay, so it looks like at least 3 people did not see the size requirement, and I, as I was quickly looking through it, did not see the size requirement. So I don't feel like that's I don't think we are the ones making the mistake here. I think the way the class was written and set up is unclear. So whatever size you guys make your project, it's fine, because clearly the way the class was written was not clear. Every time I go ahead, every time I make a change to a document in Photoshop, I do it on a new layer. And this is something called non-destructive editing, which is a really important graphic design concept that you guys, that we'll talk more about in the future. But basically you want to put every change on a separate layer so that if your client or employer comes back to you and says, I need you changed about this I need you to change this one thing about the document, you can do that change instantly. Whereas if you put everything on the background layer, or you merge layers, or you have multiple items on the same layer, then you have to start your whole project all over again just to make one change, which is really annoying and not very efficient, especially when you're working in an industry where you have to make changes fast. So I'm going to go ahead and make a new layer. So I'm going to click on the Make a New Layer icon down here at the bottom of the layer panel. You can also make a new layer by hitting Shift Command N. Shift Command N if you're on a Mac, and Shift Control N if you're on a PC. Which brings me to my next point before I start making pretty pictures. Taking notes on Photoshop instructions, whether you're watching the Photoshop instructions on Atomic Learning, or whether you're watching the instructions here in my little live class sessions that I do. Taking notes is super important, because there are so many steps involved in a lot of Photoshop and graphic design projects. It's kind of, I say graphic design is a lot like a recipe, whereas, you know, if you're watching like a cooking show and someone preparing something, you're not going to remember all the ingredients and all the measurements and all like the steps involved. And similarly with Photoshop, you're not going to remember all the shortcut keys and all the steps involved if you don't write it down. And me personally, there's certain things in Photoshop that if I wasn't teaching, I would not remember it. You know, as a teacher, I get in the habit of basically explaining things to people over and over again. So like I've explained certain tools in Photoshop at least like 3,000 times to my different students. And so at that point, once you start to explain it like 30 times or more, it gets cemented in your head. But for those of you who, you know, will do a project once, and then 3 months from now, maybe you do have a freelance project for a client or employer, and you need to do a certain thing in Photoshop. If you don't have it written down, you're not going to remember how to do it. So write stuff down. Even now, there's certain things like making a cloud brush in Photoshop. Every single time I have to make a cloud brush, I look at my instructions that I had written down on how to do that, because I can't, there's so many steps involved, I can't remember. So write down notes is the thesis statement of that little lecture. Okay, so next thing is, every time we make a change on our Photoshop document, we make a new layer. So I'm going to hit Shift Command N to make a new layer. And then I'm going to go over here to our Paint Bucket tool. And your Paint Bucket tool, like many tools in Photoshop, is roommates with other tools. So the Paint Bucket tool also lives in the same little button as the Gradient tool. So you might go over to the left side of your screen, in your tool panel and see the gradient tool, which is a square that's kind of darkish on one side and kind of lightish on another side. You might see that and you might go like, oh no, I don't see the paint bucket tool. But if you click on it, click and hold, you'll go to the paint bucket tool, and then you can colorize your document. So I'm going to venture down here to my foreground and background colors. And I can click on this foreground color. Basically, whatever on the foreground color is what I'm going to paint with my paint bucket. So I'm going to go over here to this color picker that came up when I clicked on my foreground color. And I'll choose a color. And here's a pro tip about graphic design in general. If you're making a background color, you either choose a background color from way up here or from way down here. Don't choose a background color that's in the middle, because you will not be able to have enough contrast if you choose a background color that's in the middle in order to make your text readable. So background color should always be way up here or way down here. So I'm going to choose this light blue. There we go, have a nice light blue color. And I was actually on 50% opacity. See how it's kind of very, very light? So we can keep on clicking again until we get 100% opacity. Or you can just go up to the top of the screen and type in 100, okay? So that's my first little demo on how to use the paint bucket tool. Again, paint bucket tool lives on the same button as the gradient tool. So if you see one, you have to click on it to get the other. Then the foreground color swatch, that is where you select your foreground color, the color that you're going to paint with your paint bucket tool. Select something either light or very dark, and then to paint with your paint bucket, just click on your background. Now I'm going to make a text layer. So I'm going to click on make a new layer icon here, or hit Shift Command N, which is a shortcut key that you all should write down. Next, I'm going to go to my text tool here. And then I'm going to go down here to my foreground color. I can also go up here to select the color for my text tool. So up here, that's a good place to start. Because I chose a very, very light color for my background, I'm going to choose a very, very dark color for my text. That way I have something that's nice and readable. Now I'm going to click OK. And right now my text tool is defaulted to Impact, which is a nice bold sans serif font that's good for posters and such. Impact at 36 points, which, let's see how that looks on an 8x10 72 dpi project. It's a fairly decent size. So then I'm going to go ahead and type my name. Let's say I wanted to make this text bigger. What I can do is click and drag to highlight my text, then go up to the top of the screen and choose a different size. Let's say 72 points was even too small for me, and I wanted to make something even bigger. What I can do is type in this little spot up here and make it even larger. Now let's say I wanted to move this text around on my document. I can go over here on the left side to the little move tool, which is this bad boy right here. Click and move this around. Let's say I wanted to rotate this text so I could do something kind of slanty and fun. I can hit Command T or Control T if you're on a PC. Command T or Control T on a PC, and I can hover my cursor near the corner of the bounding box. So again, hit Command T or Control T if you're on a PC. That brings up the bounding box. And then you hover your cursor near one of the corners of the bounding box, and then you can rotate it. And that way you can fit your text and do something fancy like that. Let's say you wanted to change your font. Your font is like the typeface. I can go to my little text tool, double click on my text here, click on my font drop-down menu here, and I can scroll through the different fonts. Ta-da, pretty easy. Now, every time we make a new document in Photoshop, it's a really good idea to save and back up the Photoshop document as well as the PDF. So I'm going to go to File, Save As, and the Photoshop document will give us all of our layers. I'm going to make a folder on my desktop, and I'm going to click New Folder to make that new folder. And I'll call this new folder School Assignments. And then I will name this, week 1 assignment, or however the classroom says to name it, .psd. .psd will give you the file that has all your layers so you can continue to edit it. Okay, so that's the PSD. Now, the discussion says to save it as a PDF. So to do that, you'll go to File, Save As, Photoshop, PDF, right there. And I would personally recommend unchecking layers. That way it'll be a smaller file that will be easier to upload. And I would also recommend choosing smallest file size, again, for the easy to upload quality. And then hit Save PDF, and then you have a PDF. Pretty easy, right? Cool. Now, coming up for week 2, we're gonna make a 11 by 17 that has at least 3 layers. Oh, this is gonna be super easy. So to do that, we go to File. Oh, what did you miss? You missed how you change the size of the file. Okay, cool. I'll do that. So I'm gonna go to File, New, and where it says, usually it's gonna be, and make sure it's in inches, and we're gonna make this 11 by 17. Let me go back to the classroom and make sure. 300 dpi CMYK. Okay. So 11 by 17, the resolution is going to be 300. And the color mode is going to be CMYK. Oh, Nicholas, you missed how I changed the size of the file when I was saving it. Okay, all I did when I was saving the PDF was from the drop-down menu, I selected smallest file size. So just write that down in your notes. You go File, Save As, Photoshop PDF, and then when you open that Photoshop PDF dialog box, you select smallest file size. Okay, now I'm going to click Create. Okay, so what are some things that we can use for layers for the 3 layers required for this project? We can go to, again, our little paint bucket tool. This time, let's be fancy and choose a gradient. Now, pro tip, gradients in general are not really advisable for backgrounds because you want your background to be simple so your text or other visual elements can be easy to read. But sometimes radial gradients, which create a vignette, if used very subtly, can be kind of cool. So I've selected on the same button, remember, paint bucket tool and gradient tool are roommates together. So on the same button as the paint bucket tool, I'm going to select the gradient tool. And from the options available at the top of the screen, I selected what's called the radial gradient, which means the inside is going to be light and the outside is going to be dark. And then what I can do is I can select any of these gradients. Now I just want a simple one where it goes from one color to white, so it's easy. But as you can see from my presets, it only gives me a black to white or my foreground color to white. So I want to change the color. To do that, I just click on this little square here that has the stops, double click, and this gives me the color picker. Now remember, I wanted to choose a light color that gradually goes into white so that, again, I can make text and other elements that are easy to read. So I'll do that. I'll select this kind of light purplish blue color, and then I'm going to click OK. Now to make a gradient, you click and drag. There is a small chance it's going to go from purple to white instead of white to purple. Let's see. Yep. So it gave me purple in the middle and white towards the outside. I was envisioning the opposite. I was envisioning purple on the outside, white on the inside. So to fix that, I'm going to hit Command Z to undo. I'm going to click reverse. Oh, by the way, Command Z is in zebra, is a really important shortcut key that you want to make friends with because Command Z will allow you to undo your mistakes. So now what I did is I hit Command Z because it was a gradient I didn't want. And then I selected reverse from the top of the screen. And then I'm going to click and drag. And that's what I want. I wanted something that was dark on the corners and then light towards the inside. Okay, now I'm going to make a new layer. And again, we have to make 4 layers. So I'm going to venture over here to my custom shape tools. And the ellipse tool, well, you have the rectangle tool, the rounded rectangle tool, and the ellipse tool, and the polygon tool. It's kind of obvious what each one does. The ellipse tool makes circles and ellipses. The rounded rectangle tool makes rectangles that have rounded edges, and the rectangle tool makes rectangles, right? And the polygon tool and the custom shape tool give you a little bit more options. So I'm just going to start with the ellipse tool. And with the ellipse tool, I will let's do a white ellipse. So to make my ellipse pure white, I am going to hit the letter D on the keyboard. That resets my foreground and background colors to black and white. That's just the letter D, no Command D, no Control D, just straight up the letter D on your keyboard. And then I'm going to hit the letter X on my keyboard. That toggles my foreground and background, so now white is my foreground color. Now I'm going to click and drag at a diagonal angle, and you can see here that I am making an ellipse. And an ellipse, is a circle that's viewed in perspective. But the thing is, I would really prefer a nice, pure, perfect circle. So if I don't want to accidentally skew and stretch this, if I want to keep a perfect circle, I can hold down the Shift button And if you hold down the Shift button and draw your circle, it makes a perfect circle. Okay, now when you're ready to draw the shape, let go of your clicker and let go of your Shift button. Now, by default, your custom shapes should usually be drawn as a shape. If you look up at the top of the screen and see this little drop-down menu here, it should be drawn as shape, and that's the correct way to do it. Sometimes it might be defaulted to pixels. I would just strongly recommend against using pixels because you can't really resize them. You're limited. You can't make changes really to it. It causes a lot of problems. I think I go into detail on this in the other video I made. So be on shape mode. The reason that you would pick pixels, I mean, there's a lot of reasons. Let's say you're just quickly making a shape that you want to apply filters to, you want to use it inside of a layer mask, you want to distort it, and you plan on painting on it because you're doing digital painting. And you don't feel like going through the whole extra step of rasterizing it before you digital paint on it and all that. So there's reasons, but I would say by default, unless you have a specific reason to use pixels, just use the shape tool. Okay, so when you use the shape tool, you're creating what's called a vector shape, which is a shape that is made using that mathematical equation, which means that you can easily resize it without losing resolution. You also get access in the shape mode to this handy properties window, which is also the same as the properties window up here. And the properties window allows you to do fancy things like put a stroke or an outline around your shape. So if I click on this little second icon that's next to my fill, also this one up here that says stroke, it lets you, I'm going to now choose some nice purple color. I am now making, as you can see, this purple outline around my circle. Now, do not be confused by the bluish outline that's around my circle. That bluish outline is just the thing in Photoshop that tells you you're making a path, and you can change that path. Once you switch to a new layer or save it as a JPEG or save it as a Photoshop document or whatever, that blue line is going to go away. So that blue line is a guide, not a design element. Now I'm going to click on this little line here, and I can choose to make this a dashed line like so, pretty fancy, or a dotted line like that, which is also equally fancy. Now, like I've demonstrated already, I can continue to increase the size of these dots and make large dots or smaller dots. Something else I can do in this window is change the orientation of my stroke. So I can click on this little drop-down menu here, and I can have my dots be right on the circle or right outside the circle or inside the circle. I can also change the, that's interesting. Usually there's another option here. This is my first kind of experience with the new version of Photoshop. So there is a slight chance they might have changed something. There was another option down here, but they must have moved it somewhere else. So I will have to find that and do another demonstration for that later. Oh, fun Photoshop updates. There are also, there's a couple 2019 updates which are a little bit troublesome, whereas if you have different layers in Photoshop overlapping, it's very difficult to select one layer and move it without selecting the other layers. And it used to be in Photoshop, you can hold down the Shift button to retain the height and width proportions of photos, and that's no longer the case. Now it would just defaults to maintaining the height to width proportion. So little things like that might trip me up a little bit as I'm getting used to the new interface. But for you guys, since you have no experience with the previous interface, you're all good. You know, it's always hard to change something, you know, change your workflow to something that's new. It's much easier to learn something from scratch and you're like, I didn't even know about the previous version. So that said, yay, we made a circle, and our circle has dots on it, which is cool. So now I'm going to go over here to my tool panel, and I'm going to click on the move tool, and this will allow me to, I can move my circle thing all over the place. I can put it all sorts of places. How about right there? Okay, something else I am going to show you. What if I did like that? I can make like a flower thing. Something else that I'll show you, maybe this will be our third layer, is the polygon tool. I love this tool because the polygon tool allows you to make stars. And again, this time I'm gonna go up to the top of the screen and turn off stroke. And for my fill, instead of using white, I'm going to use a color that is really close to white, but not quite. So I'll use a purple that is very, very super, super pale. Okay. Oh, that's annoying. Okay, because I had already had my circle selected, it decided to make my circle purple, which I do not want. So I need to make a new layer. I need to make a new layer so that, oh, that's really annoying. It turned off my dots too. Bring my dots back on. Okay, good. So that's a good little lesson for you all, so you don't make the same mistakes I did. You know, I went up and changed the settings prior to because I thought, oh, I selected my polygon tool, and so now I'm ready to make a new polygon, and I'm just setting my settings for the polygon, but actually changed what my ellipse did. So don't make the same mistakes I did. Okay, so now I've made a new layer. And I think now that I've selected my polygon on a new layer, I can continue to, you know, make my changes. This time I'll use that light purple color. Turn off the stroke. And with this polygon tool that I've selected, I can click on this little gear icon. It looks like a gear. And I'm going to click on star because I'm going to make a star. And I'm going to indent my sides by 99%. And then I'll put 66 sides on my star. I'm going to hit enter. Now watch this. I'm going to click and drag. And I've made this really cool starburst. I'm going to hit enter. And so that's what it looks like. Now, right now, my starburst, if you guys can see it, is on top of my circle. And I think it would be much stronger if it was kind of behind my circle. So I'm going to click on my polygon 1 and drag it behind my ellipse. And isn't that nice? It's like these sunbeams coming out of it. Okay, yet another, this I guess could be your fourth layer if you want to add 4 layers. Make a new layer. I go to my custom shape tool now. The custom shape tool looks like a little amoeba. And it gives you access to the custom shape library, which is all of these. Now your custom shape library might seem kind of like it doesn't have as many things as mine does. You can append all of the available shapes into one library by clicking on this little gear icon here, clicking on the word all, clicking append, and then all of your custom shapes will appear here. In later classes, I can show you how to download custom shapes from the internet and also make your own custom shapes, which is something that I really like to do. Okay, now what shall we do? I feel like putting a little moon on this. I'm going to select this moon, and I'm going to shift, click. There's my moon. And now I can play with the orientation of these different elements. So I can move that over there. I can click on the moon shape, and I can move this over here if I wanted. Over here. You know, I can make it smaller. I feel like it wants to be maybe smaller. And to make it smaller, I just hit Command T, or maybe up here. So Command T, and then hold down the Shift button and click and drag to, and there we go, there's my document. My document actually has 4 layers here. Now let's see the requirements. So it's asking you to submit the PSD file for your peers to review for week 2. So to do that, you just go File, Save As, and you can call this week 2, and then you can use your name, .psd, and then hit Save. And submit that to the discussion board. Okay, so I think that's as many tools as you might need in order to get started with Photoshop and be successful. Does anyone have any specific questions or requests? Because if not, you guys are free to go. Oh, cool. So Nicholas is asking a good question, how to move an item on your document. Good question. So to move an item, there's 2 ways to do it. You'll first want to go away, channels. Go away. Okay, so all we need is the layers. So first you'll want to click on the layer that you intend to move here in the layer panel. So I have shape 1 grayed out. So that means I have a shape 1 selected. Then you can either hit Command T, which will bring up the bounding box, and Command T will let you resize the object like so, and then hit Enter when you're done, or hit the letter V on your keyboard. And once you hit the letter V, V as in Victor, that lets you move the shape around. Cool, makes sense? Oh, is there a way to copy or make more than 1 circle or moon? Definitely. So if I click, let's say I wanted a couple of these circles. So I would click on ellipse 1, and then I would hit Command J. Command J, definitely write that down, or Control J if you're on a PC. That duplicates the layer. Then what you'll do is hit Command T, hold down the Shift button while you resize, and then you can move this into place like so, right? Right. And so let's say I wanted to, you know, make a couple of these. I could continue to hit Command J. Right, Command J. And like so. Okay, so Kurt is asking if you wanted to do a chain pattern in the shape of a circle, would you create a circle path first and then okay, so a chain pattern. So are you making a pattern that you want to be inside the circle, or are you making a chain that you want to be on the outside of the circle as a border? Chain is a border. Okay. So that's a little bit more complicated. So if anyone who's a beginning Photoshop person is watching this and being totally confused, don't worry. Like, this is like an advanced thing that I probably wouldn't teach for like a later class. But what I would recommend that you do is make a new layer and then go to your ellipse tool. And then up at the top of the screen, select the path mode. Okay. And then what you would do is draw your circular path. From there, you'd hold down the control button and then click on your path. Or actually, first, before you hold down your control button and click on your path, you'd go to your brush tool and you'd select, this is probably after you've made the chain brush, and then loaded the chain brush into your available brushes. But let's just say Kyle's Pastel Palooza is our brush tool. So I'll use that as our example. So you put that brush on your brush settings. Then you would hold down the control button, click on the path. Oh, I'm sorry. Go back to your ellipse tool, hold down the control button, click on your path, and then click stroke path. And then the tool that you'd select would be your brush tool with, and make sure that you have that chain brush that you made selected. And then you would click OK, and see, then your circle would be stroked with the chain brush that you made. So as you can see, it makes the brush whatever size you had to begin with. So I had it at a 60, so it's relatively small. So if I wanted that brush to be, larger, I'd have to, before control clicking on it, I had to make the brush like 300 or whatever. So let's say I'll do that right now, make it like 188. That's how big it would be. Then I go back to the ellipse tool, hold down the control button, click on the path, click stroke path, select my brush, and then click OK, and then that's the brush that I want. Okay? So yeah, a little bit more complicated there. A little bit more steps involved. Another option would be to simply make that chain in Illustrator and put it on a circle and then import it into Photoshop. Anyone else need help with anything? And Kurt is asking, that would keep it as a vector, right? No. The stroke that you made would be a brush, so it would be raster. I don't think there's any way that you can make a, I'd have to like go deep and look at some Photoshop tutorials, but because of the nature of Photoshop, I don't believe there's a way to make a vector border stroke around an object that is a pre-made vector shape. I think the way I would do it would be to do it in Illustrator and then import it into Photoshop if I wanted it to remain a vector. But then again, I could be wrong. Like I could, you know, look at some Photoshop tutorials and maybe there's a tricky workaround to make that work. I'm like flipping through everything that I know about Photoshop's vector tools. And I think another way to do it would be to make a chain in Photoshop as a Photoshop custom shape. And then you'd end up just having to like draw that custom shape over and over again around your circle if you wanted to keep it as a vector. Oh yeah, Eric, you're welcome to take photos for this course and you're welcome to import photos into your Photoshop project. And the way that you import photos into Photoshop is really easy. And yes, Mercedes acts vector versus pixels. Photos are always going to be pixels. You know, drawings and digital paintings are always pixels. And vectors are flat shapes that can be easily resized. So it just depends on what you're wanting to do. If you're wanting to work with, you know, photos, that's going to be a raster-based design. And if you want to work with you know, flat shapes, like Illustrator shapes, then that would be a vector design. So I'm going to go to File, Place Embedded, and that is how we bring a photo in. Very easy, File, Place Embedded. Now let me see if I can find a cute animal. I'm trying to think of all my cute animal photos that I might have. I feel like I recently cleaned off my computer. I'm like, what do I have as far as cute animal photos? Here we go. File, Place Embedded. And there is my picture. And so after importing a picture into Photoshop, you can either Command T, you have to make sure you click on that layer first, Command T. It really wants to go to my vector shape that I already made. Silly. Come on, T. That is really irritating. So I'm having a little Photoshop glitch right now. Just every time there's a new program update, you get these little glitches. Let me see if I can turn this shape off. It really thinks that I want to work with this shape, even though I'm completely done with that shape. So, but normally, I'm going to have to delete that layer because it's causing me issues. Where is it? There it is. And let's actually go to path, and I'll delete that path. There we go. So, yeah, I just had to delete that path to make it stop bugging me. So to resize a picture, you just click on it in the layer panel, hit Command T. Don't hold down the Shift button, and click and drag to resize it. Then, yeah, the photo is on its own layer. And in future classes, we'll learn about masking, which is the way that you can cut the subject out of its background. And there's a variety of different techniques that you can use to cut a subject out of its background. Okay, any other questions? All right, you guys, thank you so much for being an awesome class. Feel free to email me if you get stuck with anything. That's what I'm here for. I'm here to help.